Pleasure.
This section always sponsored on Business Mondays by Deepwater Wind. Amazing show by Molly O'Brien in the previous hour with Music Hall of Famer Dan Moretti and two genius little guys from Brown talking about their drone delivery system.
Wow.
And guys who wrote a book on clam shacks. Like, could you have a better day in Rhode Island? Drones, jazz musician, and clam shacks. It's all good here, and go local live.
I'm waiting for Amazon to deliver my books by drone.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's making us rethink going to a print version. We'll just have it dropped by drones. Seriously, obviously, last week, Go Local broke a big story about the beginning of a process in which Partners Healthcare up in Boston, major healthcare organization, is signed a letter of intent to begin the process of acquiring Care New England. Some people called it a merger. That's not exactly what I would call it. It's a consumption. Talk a little bit about your first impression of what that means to Rhode Island.
Well, it wouldn't be a merger of equals, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
That. Until one sees the definitive agreement and one begins to see what's happening in the regulatory process, there's not a lot of details to go through. So these remarks are really 30,000-foot remarks.
Sure.
That type of merger will obviously have a major impact on the economy of the state, and it'll have a major impact on health care as delivered. And that could be for the good. And so that's a major impact. And you hear a lot of moaning and groaning, well, we're going to lose control of another local institution. Well, I keep on remembering Industrial National Bank, Allmax, the machine tool industry. I go on and on. Rhode Island was fortunate. For decades, we did not separate ownership from management, where the rest of the country and the rest of the world was.
Right.
Economics caught up with us. And so there needs to be a recognition that we're part of a regional economy. We're not a self-contained economy. We're just too small. We haven't got the scale to do that. And so I think you have to look at this merger in light of us being part of a bigger region. And anytime you separate ownership from management from a very esteemed and institution that's been around for a long time, people feel it. They feel it psychologically, they may feel it socially, and certainly their economic impact. So that shouldn't be understated. But having said that, my first read is generally positive until proven elsewhere. And if you go through the facts and you look at where I think it's positive, ask yourself, as I state a reason, what's the option?
Right.
That's the critical
Well,
question.
I think Care New England, obviously, financial situation is in dire consequences. There's reports that the burn rate is such that it's becoming almost economically untenable. It is, Care New England's always been a bizarre group, right? You have Butler, Kent, and Women and Infants, so it's not like three similar systems that have a lot of synergy to one another.
And Women and Infants was actually built on the Rhode Island Hospital campus.
Right.
And I remember going back that far where a lot of the thinking was that eventually it would be merged with Rhode Island Hospital. Really largely for reasons of personality 20 years ago, it didn't happen.
Right.
I'm convinced that there were different personalities. It might have gone as people anticipated, but it didn't. That's history. So we can't cry over spilled milk. The first point you make is really the critical point. Care New England is hemorrhaging. I guess we're talking about healthcare. I can talk about hemorrhaging.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hemorrhaging.
Right.
It's hemorrhaging. Money, its finances are very problematic. And the day they enter into a merger agreement with Partners, they have instant stability. Now, there's no health institution in the world that is just financially in great shape, but you solve a major problem. There are a lot of people that work in those places. I can't say everyone would be kept, but the vast majority of people associated with the institution, would have fiscal stability overnight. Right now, they don't have it.
It is the second largest private employer in the state, about 8,500, according to the Department of Labor and Training. And doesn't that, listen, we have a fragile economy, and I think we have a fragile psyche here in Rhode Island. Isn't it a little bit of a blow to our psyche that we're losing control of another organization, another business, and not only are we losing control of it, it's to gosh darn, it's to Boston again.
Well, that was my original point, a
Yeah.
minute ago, that this is not new.
Yeah.
Industrial National Bank
Right.
was in Charlotte, got out of Boston.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Brown.
It only stopped at Boston on the way down to Bank of America.
Brown and Sharp,
Right.
Allmax. I can go through dozens and dozens of company that were iconic companies to the state, and that we escaped the bullet longer than most people
Yeah.
because of the ownership and management were not separated. The people that owned the businesses lived in Rhode Island and managed the businesses. 20 years ago, that changed. And to think it's not going to reach the health industry, which is replacing manufacturing and replacing, a lot of other industries as a major economic drive and as a major employer, is naive. And to also think that whether it's fixed up Obamacare or whether it's a repealed Obamacare, that there's not going to be more focus on regional health strategies is also naive. And so what this potential merger, gives us, it may be a back seat at the table, but it's a seat at the table to just be involved in the regional strategies that come with healthcare delivery. That's positive.
It doesn't have some effects though on issues like 195. 195, I think everybody thought one of the foundations to it was going to be sort of Medicinettes. And I think there was a presumption that Brown plus Lifespan plus Care New England would consume some of that, and that maybe they would create a little bit of a research structure to do this. Now, you got Partners coming in, 800-pound gorilla, tied to the number one medical school in the country, deep roots at Harvard. Is this trouble for 195? Is it trouble for Brown Medical School? Is it, what are the other legs and consequences that this is going to have?
He said, I don't think so, because there's an old administrative adage, the more responsibility you share, the more responsibility you have.
Yeah.
And so if we're tied to world-class institutions, there's still going to be Lifespan here, there's still going to be Brown University here, that's a given. And there may be certain economic advantages to do health-related innovation work here. So it depends on how well you compete. So I don't get up on that, and I think if you broaden our reach into the region, into world-class facilities, whether it's education or innovation or direct delivery of care, and it's done strategically well, there's opportunities there. So it's too early to say, but I'm not negative about that. I think there are opportunities. I think when everybody grows, a rising tide lifts all ships. It doesn't have to be a negative. Now, certainly there are going to be winners and losers, and people that thought they were the alpha dog may not be the alpha dogs anymore.
Right.
But we're looking at this from the wrong light. We ought to be looking at it from the light of the consumer. So some middle-class family sitting in their house in Cranston tonight, and God forbid, has a serious medical problem. Are they going to be better off with access to a strong regional healthcare program, or are they going to be better off with a more parochial system?
Yeah.
And so I look at it from the consumer's perspective. And from the consumer's perspective, and that's why you have to see the definitive agreement to understand better and what the regulators are looking for. If you had one option, for example, of Lifespan gobbling up Care New England, I'm not even sure that could pass antitrust muster. I'm not sure what the Federal Trade Commission would say about that. But that's a definition of a monopoly. They would have unbelievable impact on setting prices. They would negotiate with the insurance companies. They might negotiate well, they might not negotiate well, but you would be pretty captive to what their price structure was. And so injecting, and I know a lot of health economists disagree with what I'm going to say, but injecting competition may not be the worst thing in the world.
You hit on Lifespan. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but two other things happened during the course of the week. As part of the announcement with Partners, Care New England spun off, which had been, the weight around the ankles, a Memorial Hospital to Prime. Prime also owns Landmark presently, and in all likelihood, Memorial is going to shrink dramatically. And then the second announcement was that South County Hospital was beginning to have discussions with Yale New Haven, which right now operates Westerly Hospital. So you, in the course of about 4 days, you saw five of the major healthcare hospitals in the state change partners, and change partners with out-of-state relationships. Does that change it a little bit more? So it's not just partners coming in, but now all of a sudden we've got five hospitals in flux.
Well, if I was Mayor Grebbie, I'd get on my knees and say thank you prayer.
Yeah.
Because Pawtucket is a financial basket case.
Yeah.
And I think one of the bright features of the deal, at least from the point of view of the people in Pawtucket and that part of Rhode Island, is Pawtucket Memorial will stay open. It'll stay open as a part of a for-profit chain. Excuse me. But what would be the option? There's not much of an option for a community-based hospital like that. So that's probably a godsend to have somebody who really wants to run Pawtucket. Maybe different. They may see a different way to deliver health services. It's more just from there. That's positive. I don't know anything about the South County discussion with New Haven or with Yale, but it gets down to questions of market. And New Haven and Yale are not going to buy a hospital where they don't think there's any market feasibility. And so, South County has been developing a few niches in orthopedic care, for example. And if that's a profit center, why would Yale and New Haven want to do anything to disturb a profit center if they're buying the place? So, we have to begin to look at this not just, emotionally from what we're used to, but what is the world going to look like? How is medical services going to be delivered? How do we, a million people in Rhode Island, fit into a regional economy with Yale to the south and then Harvard and the great hospitals of Boston, to the north? That there's a role for us, but we have to. It may be more niched than we used to.
Go to Lifespan. Lifespan also has had some difficult financial times recently. While Care New England reported, I want to say around $60 million in losses, 50 or 60 million. Lifespan, I think, reported about $30 million in losses in the last fiscal year for them, and obviously the healthcare fiscal year runs a little bit different from the calendar year. That being said, are they going to now have to start to look to affiliate with a Boston group, or do they try and go it alone and right the financial ship and continue to be the leading player in the market? What's the challenges for them?
Well, the challenge is that there's a new healthcare delivery system environment, but they have such a significant part of the market share that I think if there's certainly no reason why management can't continue to maintain a significant market share in the state, but no one knows. At this point, we don't know. It would be nice if Lifespan did compete, with the new partners group. I think that would be better for the consumer.
Is that so? Let me ask a little bit about that. Is it better to have competition? Do you end up with costly redundancy? You have Women and Infants, which is over on their campus, and then they put in for a certificate of need to build their own baby hospital, somewhat smaller. Was that just a way? Was that gamesmanship to put in a CON, or was that are families better if there's two hospitals 8 feet apart from one another, providing the same services?
Well, when Rhode Island Hospital talked about putting in women's health care services, that's right next door to
that's what I'm saying.
Women's and infants. So that gamesmanship goes on. Within the lifespan system, they have done work on trying to cut back on redundancies, cardiology, for example, and how their groups were organized. So that's going to be a part of the washing out of the healthcare delivery system. And it's a question of looking at it, whether the glass is half full or half empty. If you're affiliated with world-class hospitals, you potentially open the door for greater efficiencies, for cost savings. If you're affiliated with a couple of hospital chains and you have to negotiate third-party payments, Are you going to have more leverage if one hospital is negotiating third-party payments, or if two big systems are negotiating third-party
Right.
payments? And you really need to see the definitive agreement and some of the regulatory issues to, to address that question. But the big thing, the key things are there advantages of scale to prove efficiencies without reducing quality? Anybody can be more efficient, but the actual is not to reduce access and quality. And are you better off having competition and dealing with third-party providers? Because when we talk about this, it's the truth of the matter is a lot of the costs come from negotiations.
Right.
And these big hospitals negotiate with insurance companies. They negotiate with indirectly with Medicare and Medicaid, and so it's not clear at this point what would be a more efficient model to negotiate. I got to tell you, monopolies are not the best thing for the consumer, and so
Right.
if you have one large institution which is effectively a monopoly negotiating and calling the prices, then you bring in another element, and that's the political element, and where do they get involved, and when do they get involved in an appropriate way. So those are tough questions, and they're not easily answered.
What's going to be the reaction of government? What's the role? What's the proper role? I'll start with the governor. What's the proper role of the governor in a situation like this?
Well, the proper role of the governor is to depoliticize it.
Okay.
Because it's going to be very easy to be subject to pressure from all kind of well-meaning and sometimes not so well-meaning special interest groups.
And who are the special interest groups?
Well,
Unions?
Unions.
Yeah.
Doctors.
Yeah.
Those would be the primary the insurance companies, and so there's going to be tremendous pressure on the Attorney General. There's going to be tremendous pressure on the governor to look at this politically. And if it's looked at politically, that would be a tremendous mistake, because the due diligence needs to be purer than Caesar's wife.
Yeah.
The numbers should lead us to where we go. There'll need to be some qualitative evaluations on the quality of care and access. But if the concern I have is that government mucks it up by becoming too political. Now, government's role is pretty clear. Government is a regulator. Now, why are they a regulator? Well, they're a regulator for two reasons. The first reason is we're dealing with a basic, service, and we're dealing, with essentially a limited number of providers of that service. So, government needs to protect the consumer. And if the governor and the Attorney General and the others who are involved in making political decisions keep their eye on the ball and say, no, my job is to protect the consumer. My job is not to protect the nurses union, or my job is not to protect the doctors, and my job is not to go to the east side, protect my friends who I have dinner parties, with.
Sure.
That's the first rule.
So Teresa Paiva-Weed maybe thought her life was going to get a little easier in the course of a week. Her life got a little more complicated. But just going back in the next year is the Attorney General. Obviously, the Department of Health under the governor is going to have a regulatory responsibility, but also the Attorney General. Do we have confidence that the Attorney General's office, either one, has the tools, expertise, capacity to make an analysis like this?
Well, I think it's going to be incumbent upon the Attorney General to get those tools.
Do they go out and hire a third party?
Well, they're going to hire consultants.
Yeah.
I don't know who, what the staffing pattern is at the Attorney General's office, but they're going to need the best independent advice they can get. And sometimes that's difficult because a lot of the players are already signed up, have a contract somewhere.
Yeah,
so
right.
That's going to be a challenge. And I think, we have to go back and ask ourselves the question. It's too late now. The horse is out of the barn, and he's also run around a few times. Why is the Attorney General involved in this process? We have a governor, we have a health department.
Right.
And that's what happens when you get government regulated, because the Attorney
Isn't it
General.
the nonprofit component of it? Isn't that?
Yeah, that's what the justification is.
Yeah.
But you want to deal with these issues, particularly regulatory issues, as efficiently as possible. You want clear delineations of responsibility and authority. And if you went out and asked most voters, what public officials they felt, had the ultimate responsibility for representing them on this, I don't think it'd be the Attorney General. I think it'd be the governor.
Well, and certainly the complexity, there's rumors, this isn't the first time it's been reported, that the sitting Attorney General may have an interest in primarying the sitting governor, which then creates a potential wild card situation, and the potential that one takes one position and one takes another.
And you have just defined the reason, I hadn't thought about this,
Yeah.
but you had just defined the reason why competition is good.
Yeah.
And why we need to look at the economy as a regional economy. So there are forces outside of the narrow parochial political interests of people seeking office in a very small state
Right.
to help guide this decision.
Yeah. The importance of healthcare as a political being, how many people it employs. I think the total number is around 60,000 people are tied to the healthcare industry in Rhode Island. Obviously, lifespan's almost 13,000. Care New England's 8,500. Charter Care, owned by an out-of-state for-profit interest, has about 3,000 employees. Mega employment just tied to those three groups. Do we need a plan? I mean, we're sort of falling into decision-making based on the financial chaos in one group rather than having any analysis or game plan as to what we're trying to do.
So I thought the state, did have a plan, but there's a fundamental question: do we need as many beds as we have?
Well, there's a 2000, and I think you were part of that, but a 2013 report that said at a minimum we have 200 too many beds, and as of right now, since 13, there's been no change. It's been sustained at the same level, about 2,400, I want to say.
Yeah, well, see, and that's an appropriate role for government. If government's going to watch out for the consumer and look at, the cost and the efficiency of the program, instead of picking winners and losers, pick winners and losers indirectly by saying, okay, we have X.
So should it be like base closure?
Well, that's an interesting idea. We need an independent process
Right.
to sort our way through this, because the fundamental question is, what level of investment do we need, and how can you best ensure access to quality services? And so government has a role regulating on those kinds of issues, but it starts to get down a slippery slope when it starts to pick winners and losers.
Yeah.
It's true of anything.
Absolutely. How do you see this shaking out in the short term and the long term?
I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I want to see how far partners and Care New England get in drafting the definitive agreement. And once you see that, then you can start forecasting.
Because there's a million rumors right now.
Yeah, right now there's a letter of understanding that we're going to try to work this thing out. And so when you see that, you can begin to answer that question. But I think the bigger issue, if you came back to Rhode Island 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, and you ask the question, what would our health delivery system look like? It would be much more regional.
Yeah.
People would have, access to services that right now are, very hard to get. There are people that go to Boston every day when they feel they can't get adequate medical services in Rhode Island. Well, what are those services? Can some of those services be brought back here through a partnership? A lot of questions like that. A unbelievably complicated issue. But I would say this, this is what, and the more things change, they stay the same, but this is interesting. The potential merger with partners is a much bigger economic development story and a health story as well than getting GE down here.
Oh, yeah.
Than the Commerce Corporation spending $58 million to build 5 hotels and a whole bunch of office buildings, to giving Wexford a tax credit so CIC can rent space to innovation companies. That's all fine. You can have your
No, this is a big deal that I think people don't quite understand. Partners, Rhode Island's budget's about $9 billion a year.
It was federal aid.
Yeah. Partners' annual budget is about $12 billion a year. Are we selling the wrong asset? Should we ask Partners, world-class healthcare organization, affiliation with Harvard, just to buy Rhode Island?
No, because then Partners is remember some smart people, and they wouldn't want their board of directors to be the Rhode Island legislature.
With that, thank you so much. This is, the Money Man. I'm assuming you've got some action on this deal. A deal this size, when you're the Money Man, you've got comings and goings and action on both sides.
My comings and goings are 300 miles south here right now.